Hello, patrons and followers of Diplomacy Direct. We've covered the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian conflict and the India's response to it in our video with General Sudhakarji earlier. Taking that discussion from the present and extrapolating that scenario onto a geopolitical playground of the big power politics and the subsequent altering effects of its conflict on the global construct in the time to come. Today, to discuss this very construct and the related contours of global politics post Russia-Ukraine war, we have Lieutenant General Rameshwar Yadav, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, ex-Director General Infantry, Indian Army. Welcome to Diplomacy Direct, General Yadav, sir. Recently, the Chinese Foreign Ministry released a statement openly criticizing US for the fault of Ukraine's fate regarding the current situation. And we will come to that when we are trying to connect, all the dots. But the statement says those who have set the fire should consider how to put it out with concrete actions rather than condemning the others, unquote. Adding to this, Hua Chuning, the ministry spokeswoman, said, quote, the parties directly concerned should exercise restraint and prevent the situation from getting out of control, unquote. This, ironically, was the same day when the PLA Air Force, with 9 J-16 jets securing one Y-8 reconnaissance plane, entered the Taiwanese airspace as the Russian attack on Ukraine began. So these are the events where the global tensions built up and the subsequent individual agendas are being formed on various geographical fronts. And today we will discuss the four big players, Russia, China, US, and Europe, the European Union, and the quadrilateral dynamics that is being formed. So for the starters, to set the context of our discussion, sir, you've correlated this conflict as an oil confrontation. Can you lend your perspective on this for our audience?
Yes, it's a very interesting scenario. Firstly, I must tell you, it is not a Ukrainian war. It is a war between two big powers as on date. And the third one, which is standing on the sidelines and trying to abet certain actions. So in this entire geopolitics, what is on? Now, if we look back a bit, after Second World War, what happened? Thereafter, all the countries, they were rushing for energy. And that's the reason the West Asia came up because of their oil reserves. And rest is history, the kind of interventions that have taken place, kind of regime changes that have taken place, and most of them on behest of the Western powers. All right. Soon after Second World War, two rival groups came up. That was NATO and Warsaw Pact. NATO came up in 1949, and in response, the Warsaw Pact, which was the communist confederation, came up in 1955 with Russia at the head of it. So the genesis of both these groups, they had confrontation inbuilt into it. Now, manifestation of that psyche of last century, already mid-last century, continues in some format or other. Only difference is now economics have taken a lead in whatever confrontation or cognitive conflict that is taking place throughout the world. Now, shifting the focus onto the European theater. You see, the Russia was a superpower, and there was a Cold War that lasted till 1991. And once the Soviet Union collapsed, that's the time the Warsaw Pact also collapsed. And that time Russia was quite weak economically. Now let us see, to become a superpower, what are the basic ingredients? First ingredient is economy. And within economy, it is the energy. That is the biggest reckoner of any power of any country. And the second thing is the military power of the country. And the third is the technology. And the last is how much money you have got in your pockets. If we analyze Russia in 1991, the military was intact. Russia continued to be the largest nuclear power on this earth. They have the largest nuclear arsenal. And the third is as a technology is concerned, and they have very high technological credentials, but they did not have money in their pockets. Now they started exploring and and Russia is the largest country. It has got 30% of natural resources of the world. Now they started exploring the natural resources. Oil and gas, the infrastructure was created to supply the Russian oil and gas to European country. That means the entire infrastructure is east to west. Now entire Europe, they need energy for the industry. They need energy for various other reasons. And without energy, their survival and the industrial manufacturing or all other facets will come to grinding halt. Now, that is the power of Russia as on date, because there are global linkages of oil and gas. You look at anywhere, West Asia, Russia, or even now, earlier, the US was a net importer of energy. Now, US is a net exporter of energy. So there is economic interest of US as far oil and gas is concerned. They're interested in to enhance the sale of oil and gas to get more and more profit. Besides the defense industrial complex, which is the biggest money earner for US. So we'll keep these 2 points in the back of our mind before we further go on in our discussion.
Like you rightly said, sir. So you touched base on a very crucial point on the Europe front, and looking at from Europe's perspective, where 21 out of 27 nations are part of NATO. So talk about taking an axe to the foot, with Russia being the majority supplier of oil and gas and power, according basically accounting the entire supply of energy and power to Europe. How do you think this is, this conflict is going to be seen by Europe, given the subsequent power crisis that will emerge, and they will face it, the pinch will be faced for quite some years here on. So, and also putting the global sanctions on Russia, that perspective is going to, get Europe implode in itself. What is your take on it?
Before I take on this point, we will push our argument a little further to what we were discussing.
Okay.
Now, rise of Russia economically, that was one weak point Russia had.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with their sale of gas and oil, that weakness is by and large, it has been covered up. Mm-hmm. Now, with that, now Russia has been an old superpower. Now they have ambitions to re-emerge as a superpower. Mm-hmm. And they have all the credentials as on date. Now, this is something not to the liking of United States, because US happens to be the sole superpower as on date. And it is not in their political thinking that they should have any compromise on this political stature what they're enjoying as of now. So Russia has become a challenge. Now, therefore, Russia must be cut down to size. It must be contained so that it doesn't acquire the status of a superpower. Now, if you analyze how it can be done, you can do nothing much about their military power. You can do nothing about their nuclear arsenal, correct? You cannot do much about their technology. But what you can do is you can tinker in the economic prowess, what economic rise, what Russia is going through. And that is the reason of their confidence. And that is the reason that Russia has demonstrated their political will to intervene militarily. They had done it 2014, they took over Crimea. And 1 year later, in September 2015, they had military intervention in Syria. Correct? Why they had done it, little later we are going to discuss. So therefore, in order to contain Russia, what what is required? So therefore, the objective of US is to primarily to create a threat to Russia, military threat. Now, as on date, NATO has 30 odd countries. That also includes the breakaway small republics of Warsaw Pact. They all converted into a market economy and now they're part and parcel of NATO. Only country, the big country, which really means is Ukraine. And Ukraine also happens to be military approach in case Russia is to be addressed. Therefore, in US and the NATO line of thinking, they wanted to extend the borders of NATO right up to the border of Russia. So therefore, Ukraine was given incentive. They were encouraged to look in 2008. Russia in one of the conferences, they said, fine, we will make you the member of NATO. Ukraine has got around 17 to 20% Russian speaking population. Remainder all are Ukrainian. And once they fell out from, once they became independent again in 1991, they adopted market economy, which is in sync with the other European countries. And Ukraine also has got benefit in case they join the European Union because the economy will flourish. That is number one. Second, there'll be better employment opportunities, better trade opportunities with a much larger group and much open market economy instead of carrying on with Russia, which is known to be a dictator. And Russia is also known to be very aggressive militarily. All right. If we're looking at all these things, so Ukraine became the weapon of choice for US. So therefore, they encourage them to fine, we will extend, you will include in NATO and also EU. And Ukrainian polity, they have been changing between pro-Russia and pro-Europe, US. So gradually what has happened, that conflict level anti-Russian feelings have increased. And this is what US is playing around with. Another thing what US is trying to do is not to permit Germany and Russia to join hands together on economic front. Because Germany is the one country which is importing the maximum, is the largest economy, importing maximum amount of Russian oil and gas. So therefore, how to make Germany not to have a bandwagon with Russia? So they have to create a rift. The rift can be created by creating a conflict onto a border or Russia-Ukraine border, for which they have been sabotaging the Ukraine and trying to create a condition wherein Russia, in desperation, invades Ukraine. Now, Russia has got two compulsions. Number one, they have been studying this complete pattern of US and European Union. So they have to take care of their own security. Therefore, they need a buffer. In their line of thinking, entire Ukraine should be under their command and they must be under their dictates. If it doesn't happen, at least the eastern part, where you have a Russian-speaking population in Donbas area, that must be under Russia. And second thing, the only avenue for the warm waters of Mediterranean is through Black Sea and Sea of Azov, which is dominated by Ukraine and Crimea. Correct? And it is very, very important for Russia because they have no other avenue to reach warm waters, and Mediterranean Sea is strategically very important because three continents are meeting there. And it has got a way to Indian Ocean, it has got a way to Atlantic Ocean. So therefore, it is a desperate situation for Russia to ensure the sea lanes right up to Mediterranean. And second thing, they must create a buffer in between. So, but US wants to mix these two issues. So therefore, there is a pipeline Nord Stream 2, which is ready, which is to supply gas to Germany. So Russia wants Germany to not to commission this pipeline. And to do that, they want to create a conflict in European theater so that European countries and Germany, they do not have a crowd. Well, we will continue importing the Russian oil. So once conflict is joined, thereafter, there'll be a case wherein the US tells all their European allies to look, do not do any trade with Russia. Do not import oil and gas from there. We will find ways and means to provide you alternate means or alternate sources for supply of oil and gas. So this is how the this is how the geopolitics of oil and gas is playing out in European theater, wherein Ukraine is a weapon of choice for US and European.
It's just a pawn on the chessboard.
Yes.
Sir, again, coming to, so approximately, like I said, 40% of the total energy and power consumption is right now coming from Russia. Whenever US, and like you rightly said, that this is US's anti-hegemony play against Russia. So what is going to be Europe's uh, stand, or how is Europe going to defy its vulnerability against this conflict that is going on, and the crisis that they are going to, if at all the sanctions are accepted by Europe, how is that going to play?
You see, all these European countries, they are in catch-22 situation.
Absolutely.
Correct. They have to decide between their loyalty to NATO/US, because it is more than 70 years that this group has been surviving, and there are a lot of positives in this group. There is a lot of mutual confidence amongst each other. There are structures which has been laid out over a period of time, and it is a very strong group for their security. That is first point. Other point is conflict between the loyalty and the economic interest. The economic interest is purchasing cheap Russian oil and gas. And as I said earlier, the entire infrastructure for supply of oil and gas is east to west, that is Russia to Europe. Not only this, the refineries in Europe, they have been designed for Russian oil. If you get oil from other sources, they may have to be modified, or they have to probably have fresh new refineries altogether. So there is a logistics problem. There is a structural problem here, which all of a sudden cannot be mitigated at all. That is one. Second thing is 27% of oil of Europe is supplied by Soviet Russia. There is an exchange of $850 million worth of gas and oil that comes into Europe every day. It is around 1.3 million barrels per day. That is the quantum that they are importing. Now, once US they imposed sanctions on Russia, they were trying to tell their West Asian allies, Saudi Arabia and UAE, to supply to start increasing their production. But this is for the first time, as it has been reported, they gave a cold shoulder. They said, fine, we are not going to increase it. And in case there is a rise in price, it benefits them. The oil was being sold between $70 to $80 a barrel. Now, moment the sanctions are imposed, it crossed $110 to $120. It is a clean profit to these countries. And not only that, they also realize whatever resources they have, they are not for posterity, they are going to reduce. It is going to impact the economies. Plus, the third point is, US, which was a net importer from the West Asia, now they're net exporters. Now, US has become their competitors. So there is a little change in the complete economics of oil and gas. Now it is going to be probably open market. Not only that, Saudi Arabia and China is the biggest customer of Saudi Arab oil. They probably are having a talk, why not to have our trade between our local currencies instead of dollars. Now that is going to impact the US economy in a big way. So coming back to the European theater, they are not getting that kind of supply in the near future. And the state where the prices all across Europe, as far as oil and gas is concerned, they have gone up 2 to 3 times. There's a 50% increase in price of petrol all across Europe. Our own minister, he had given out this statement in parliament when opposition was trying to say, look, oil and diesel prices going up. He said we have increased around 5 to 10%, wherein the rest of the world it has increased by 50%. So that is the kind of impact. Now imagine if you have energy cost going by another 30 to 40%, what will happen to costing and pricing of industrial product, what Europe is going to have? On other side, Russia and China, they have a contract. Russia has, moment there were sanctions, China said, fine, give your surplus oil to us, we have no problem. And Russia is going to give much cheaper oil to China. So Chinese products are going to be even cheaper vis-a-vis the products of European countries. So where is the competition left? So it is going to impact economies of Europe in a very, very bad way. Initial, yes, there have been solidarity as of now between all the European countries and the US. They are on the same platform. But in times to come, in my own reading, the way I read this complete situation, Europe has no choice but to import oil from Russia. That is first point. And in fact, yesterday, one of channels which covers the international affairs, they were giving a report that there are ships lined up on Russian ports. They are carrying oil secretly to the European countries because they switch off the tracking system, and then and the oil export from Russia, instead of 1.3 million barrels per day, it has increased to 1.6 million, 11 million barrel worth of oil that is moved out, and they do not know what is the destination. The fair guess is it probably is going to, part of it, and or the major part of it is going to go to Europe. So European countries in catch-22 situation, and the economic sense says that they have to depend on Russian oil sooner or later. In fact, like Hungary and one more country, they have already declared, look, we are going to import Russian gas. They are part of NATO, but then they said, fine, it is a ground reality. We are small countries. Our economy is going to be impacted in a big way. So this is how this entire game plan is going to unfold.
Sir, this all unfolds like the anti-hegemony game started by US is actually, it was for countering China some way or the other in the international trade scenario, but looks like the balance is kind of tilting in favor of China. And China, though nowhere in the picture directly, but implicitly, it's like a participant in stealth in each and every situation, in each and every scenario of this conflict. Now, and coming to China, now that we have spoken about the crouching bear Russia, and we have to come to the hidden dragon China. There was 2 hour phone call between Xi Jinping and President Biden, while Xi criticized Putin in stealth for his current onslaught, saying that China and the United States should shoulder the international responsibilities for the current situation. Uh, Biden pointed out how China's acts, are double-faced, and where he hints that the Chinese financial and military support to Russia is pretty evident, and making U.S. trust on China, an all-time low. Also brought out it brings out the dire consequences on China with the international sanctions for the ongoing support, and citing the Chinese warships sailing through the Taiwan Strait. So we are looking at two theaters, the European theater and the after effects or things developing in the theater in the Taiwanese Strait. So we see an emergence of multipolar world with China, Russia, US sharing the power pie, which you have mentioned as the aftermath of this war. So what would be the global implications of the world previously, which was barely able to hand a bipolar scenario, now going tripolar?
There are two, three issues that you have raised, and all are very interesting. I'll start with Russia as a superpower, future superpower. You see, after this Ukraine war, one thing is very clear. Russia has conveyed that they have political will and military capability to go in for aggression. That means they will use their military for their political purposes, and they have no hesitation in that. And they have done it in the past. 2014, they annexed Crimea. 2015, they intervened in Syria when Syrian rebels were backed by US. So Russia has been confronting US directly or indirectly in number of theaters, challenging their dominance. That is first point. Second, US, after they have found the oil and gas, they have become self-sufficient. They have reduced their footprints in Asian landscape. They have moved out from West Asia. They have moved out from Syria. They have moved out from Afghanistan. Wherein, if you look at it, Russia has got influence in all these areas, thereby saying that Russia is occupying the strategic spaces vacated by US. And the advantage Russia is that all these regions, that is Central Asian republics, Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, and Lebanon, this is the area of influence. They are geographically contiguous to Russia. Unlike US, which is another 10 to 15,000 kilometers away, and they have to bring in their forces in case they have to, and it is a very logistic nightmare to do that. So Russia cannot be ignored anymore as a big power, if not superpower, in times to come. So, and there are going to be all these countries which are influenced of Russia economically and politically. They are going to synergize their political capital and investment alongside Russia. Now coming to China. China is the biggest trading partner throughout the world as on date. They have very nicely, very synchronized supply chains that they have. You have to simply order a product and the product would be delivered at your doorstep. No tears. And this will be done at the most competitive prices. Today, even in US, if someone wants to do up their house, each and everything of the household consumer goods, they all come from China. Correct. So that is the kind of supply chain that they have. And they have plenty of forex reserves with them with which they can play around. And you have heard about the BRI. They are trying to expand the economic expansion with the help of old Silk routes. And they are trying to get into Russia, into Europe, into West Asia, Africa, and Indian Ocean region. Everywhere they have their footprints as on date. So that is the second thrust line of the China that they have. And because of this Ukraine war, what is happening, the economies world over are going to see negative trends. They're going to be higher prices of fuel energy. With that, they're going to be inflation. With that, they're going to be high interest rates in the banks, and the competitiveness of the economies is going to come down. While it is happening in the rest of the world, as far as China is concerned, it is not impacted to that extent because their energy is being imported from in the long-term contract from the West Asia. They are reported to have a contract of $400 billion with Iran. And now Russia is offering them cheaper energy, another pipeline probably through Kazakhstan they're going to lay. So China is in a very happy situation as of now. Third point, China has no hesitation in using military to expand their turf, and through their turf to expand the economic thing. You see what is happening in Indo-Pacific. And the entire China Sea, they are claiming it 9-dash line upwards. So China has got the complete domination. It is in their own area, unlike US, which has to come to Indo-China to a very long distance. All right. And the fourth thing that is happening is, as far as China is concerned, they have footprints in entire Africa. They have footprints in West Asia. They have footprints in Europe. They have footprints in US itself and the Latin America. So if there is any country which has got footprints and throughout the globe, it is China. Now it is going to benefit them financially tremendously in the current situation. So current situation has come as a boon to China, unlike all other powers. So Chinese power is going to increase in times to come. And this power will also increase because of sanctions imposed by US on Russia. They have been removed to the SWIFT mechanism. Now it is giving a way to initiate the alternate mechanism for international currency transactions. Now, in that, China is bound to exploit this window. They are going to start their trade with lot of countries wherever feasible in yuan. So with that, the dollar value is going to come down and the yuan share is going to increase the international fiscal environment. So that will come to their benefit. So therefore, henceforth, there is a likelihood there are going to be three big powers: US, Russia, and China. So all three have to share the global pie in the field of economics, in the field of politics, and the field of military.
Sir, you just mentioned the word. So in the geopolitical context, you just said that you mentioned about the BRI and the Eurasian turf. So given these situations and China trying to dominate the Eurasian turf, long guarded by Russia, right? So now China is trying to play in Putin's backyard. Do you see a China-Russia fallout due to this regional race sooner rather than later?
Firstly, I'll start my argument that both these countries are socialist countries. So there is an ideological convergence between both of them. And this convergence is in a position of willy-nilly against the market economies of Western world. So they have a common adversary, I would put it, in field of economy, that is US. So there is a common point between Russia and China. So while there may be differences because of the tough play economically subsequently, but there will be always an overlap and convergence in a lot of issues. That is the first point.
Now, on the ideological point, I kind of beg to differ here, because the Russian ideology, the Marxist and Leninist communism, and the current Xi communism, which actually comes from a mixture of Mao communism and then diluted a bit by Dengism, and then a bit distorted by Hu Jintaoism and all of that. Because then we are looking at a pure communist / socialist clashing on a trade turf with a capitalist communist, so demi-communist, pro-capitalist kind of giants in the same turf. So don't you think that's going to play around a bit different?
A very interesting argument. But let me tell you, this is my assessment. Russia as well as China, they're no more original pure pedigree communist countries. They are reasonably market-oriented economies as on date. Actually, it is a hybrid economy between the socialist line of thinking and the open market economy as on date. So comparing on the old parameters may not be fully correct. Yes, you have a point. That means there is a variance within the socialist complete paradigm between these two countries. But I don't think it is going to, in a geopolitical terms, when you find US and Western world on one side and these two trying to share the pie on the other side, the impact is certainly is going to be there, but not to that extent. Now, I want to give out another point where the difference is going to come in. The major difference, what I foresee is China after this would like to be the big brother to Russia, because Russia after this is bound to have some decline in their overall net power, because the kind of expenditure that they have now because of sanctions all said and done, and because of reduction in their oil sales, so they're going to be little lesser. That's where China would like to be the big brother. But would Russia accept that? Answer is no. Firstly, Russia is the old superpower. So they have that superpower ego in them. And now they're aspiring to reemerge as a superpower once again. All right. Then third thing is the military credentials of Russia with the largest nuclear arsenal is unmatched with China. Russia has got more than 6,500 nukes, whereas China is known to be around 300 only. Moreover, whatever Chinese armament and equipment is, it has got Russian origin. Third thing, which is in favor of Russia, is they have certainly much better technology even now against China. What China excels is the financial and economic capabilities as on date. So that is the only plus point with them. So Russia is unlikely to be subservient to Chinese dictates. That's where there may be some difference. The fourth point, what I want to put across, Russia is looking at political influence in the areas where they want to have the West Asia, the Asian subcontinent, even South Asia, they want to have this kind of influence. They have an ambition of having access to warm waters of Indian Ocean. So Mediterranean to Indian Ocean, they are looking at bear hug, and this is their ambition since Tsarist era. During Tsar's time, they wanted to do that, and that's where there was always a threat the communists will come to Afghanistan, to Pakistan, and then go down. And if you see, Russia is trying to befriend Pakistan of late. Russia is also part of CPEC, China-Pak Economic Corridor bandwagon. This is primarily to have an access for the trade and the military matters in Indian Ocean. And if that happens, with China in Gwadar port, Russia getting access through Iran or Pakistan in times to come. Now, what will happen to geopolitics of US and Indo-Pacific? That means China and Russia both are going to milling around another in this Indian Ocean, and which is going to impact the entire equation Indo-Pacific altogether. So these are the kind of implication that one can assess as of now, while it is not there on ground, but the feasibility cannot be ruled out.
So basically, it is still uncertain, but there can be a position or a situation of a trade bonhomie after this, knowing each other's ambitions and power. So again, sir, going back to the regular Chinese violations of the Taiwanese airspace, the world knows that the theater is going to be open up, it's going to open up sooner or not too later. China talks about the current conflict from a high moral ground, as if it has been abiding by the core, international principles of or the foreign policy principle of non-interference in other states' sovereignty. When this comes while it is trying to be, hostile towards Taiwan, UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson exclaims his concerns about China gaining credence over its right to conduct similar actions on Taiwan. And if the West fails to support Ukraine's independence, this is going to be all the more evident. To which Hua Chuning says that Taiwan is not Ukraine, and Taiwan has always been an inalienable part of China. So this is an so for the rest of the world, it looks like the same narrative on which the current conflict is based upon. So how will China evaluate its options for a similar conflict against Taiwan?
Firstly, China talks about one China policy, correct? Thereby saying that Taiwan is part of China.
Mhm.
That is very fine. The second thing that has happened in the Ukraine war, you see, US and European Union, the NATO countries, they have not joined the war directly, correct? It gives a precedence wherein probably in case China goes in for, China follows the same pattern like Russia has invaded Ukraine. China may also, this is a common talk, the China taking a cue from the reluctance of Western powers to join the confrontation directly, probably for the fear of starting a third world war, or probably the nuclear deterrence has functioned. They are looking at the larger picture. Whatever be the case, in case China, people are talking about the China may follow the same pattern and go in for annexation of Taiwan. Now, my take in this is slightly different. Russia and Ukraine has a common land borders. Correct? It is easy to invade and get into Ukraine. But to annex Taiwan, China has to cross a large sea space. And ultimately, for annexation, you require boots on ground. That is, army has to be landed. It can only be landed either by air or by ships. Now, once you cross this sea space, there is no surprise left. In case of Russia and Ukraine, there was a surprise. Russia, all of a sudden, on 24th Feb, they raided. While all this time they were saying, look, we are not going to invade or anything else. And all of a sudden, we found Russian tanks and the BMPs rolling into Kiev and the eastern side, Kharkiv, and so many other places. It cannot happen in case of China.
Yeah,
No surprise.
we'll see
All right.
another
Not
we'll
only
see
this.
another Normandy situation if that happens.
Absolutely. Not only this, Taiwan is fully prepared. They have got coastal defenses ready. You have seen the visuals and on TV. They're carrying out the exercises, air exercises, land exercises. Plus, Taiwan has got a backing of US. They have given them state-of-art equipment. And in case there is any inclination of China doing that, US is going to, even if they do not participate directly, they're going to pump in a lot of arms and ammunition into Taiwan. Next thing, in Ukraine, you have seen that built-up areas were converted into fortresses, and Russia, despite it such a so much of military strength, they were found that they could not capture these built-up areas easily because it guzzles up troops. It is infantry-oriented operation, boots on the ground. Now, in order to take means annex Taiwan, similar kind of situation is going to develop. Now, China has to bring in their guns, they have to bring in their missiles, they have to get their infantry all onto that show. So it is very difficult. It is easier said than done. When you come to military logistics, it is going to be a nightmare. I don't think, in my way of thinking, it will be something what happened between Russia and Ukraine. It is difficult.
So, sir, now the mother of all questions in this scenario is where I'll need you to crystal ball gaze into the situation where we evaluate the situation from the 50s, where Russia was keen to join NATO. The idea back then was to facilitate stability in the region, which apparently was not agreed to at that time. So, how would the world have been different if that would have been the case, Russia being the part of NATO?
Very interesting. Though means one has to transport yourself 70 years back.
Time travel.
Okay,
Yeah.
nevertheless, I'll try and answer that. Firstly, if you that was the period soon after Second World War. There was a political flux. There were question marks on the loyalties of various countries. You had seen it initially. Russia was ally of Germany, and it was in June 1941 the Germany means attacked Russia altogether. So Russia was ally of Britain and US, correct? So there were shifting loyalties. That was an aggressive power and scenario at that time, and they were one of the reasons for victory of allies that time. The NATO was formed in 1949, correct? And that time Russia was ally of UK and US and France. Fine. So as an ally, when this organization came up, so USSR at that time, so they were very keen to join this alliance. Primarily, they were not very sure whether Germany, West Germany, is not going to militarize once again and pose a threat to Russia. And all said and done, after the war, Russia was weak. The power was had declined quite a bit. So they needed time to consolidate, and to do that, they wanted to join this group. But UK and US, they were not in favor of this alliance. For primarily, firstly, ideologically, Russia was different. These democratic countries, they were market economies, they were communists, and they had a fear that in case Russia becomes part of NATO, where is the surety that this communism is not going to spread into European subcontinent? Because there were initially there were 12 countries, but there were small countries which are weak, which are vulnerable, and weak and vulnerable countries are quite susceptible to going in for the communist system for their own economy and their own, as a welfare state. So those are the kind of apprehensions probably that they did not permit Russia to join that time. Now coming to the second point, had they joined, what would have happened? Sooner or later, because of this ideological differences, and I'm sure there would have been a rift between the mainstay European countries and Russia. And as the things emerged later on, means Russian economy continued going down because of they had overspread their wings and they had collapsed ultimately. So probably one is not very sure whether this scenario would have come about, or had Russia been part of NATO, there was no threat in Europe. Because if you look at it within Europe, on the periphery of Europe, there have been number of conflicts which were going on. So it is anybody's guess what would have happened. It is very difficult to go back and with a hindsight say that what would have been the political complexion of Europe had Russia been part of it.
We speak about the US hegemony and China and Russia forming a common front to fend off US's hegemony. If that would have happened and Russia would have been a part of NATO, would Russia and US together would have stood together to fend off China in today's situation?
In fact, I really can't comment on with the hindsight what would have happened in that scenario. That is theoretical. But if we transport this entire scenario in the present day context, China is the main challenge to US. So it is in US interest to see to it that China is contained. That is the reason US is flexing their arm in Indo-China, Indo-Pacific. Correct. If we look at that, Russia should be supported by US. Correct. So that there is no nexus between Russia and China. And US has been studying Russia for quite some time, last 20-25 years, when the economy is rising leaps and bounds. All right. So if that be so, if Russia and US, they are in some kind of a amicable situation, so both of them can be against China. All right. So to that extent, if you look at it, is it a policy flaw by US? Yes, there is a point in this kind of a argument. And in fact, last night I was listening to a debate on TV, one of the US scholar professors, he's the one who had said this. I said there is a common ground between US and Russia against China. If US wants to contain China, so whether their policies are correct or not correct, that is something that is a big question mark.
So again, enough crystal ball gazing. This was absolutely a pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you for your time and insights. And thanks to our viewers for being patrons of Diplomacy Direct. Thank you very much.
Before I wind up, I would like to say, whatever we have discussed today is all speculative.
Absolutely.
All right. How this entire geopolitics is going to take what turn, it is anybody's guess. But looking at the present day geopolitics which is on, we have to take a step forward from here and make our informed guess onto what is likely to happen in times to come. This is what our thrust is. They may be variants. There could be different opinions, different takes on what we have discussed today.
Absolutely, sir. So basically, in geopolitics, there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. The way US made their amends with Japan and stand together in Quad now and in many other trade and military alliance situations. Similarly, it's high time looking at rise of China and not in a good way to make amends with Russia and try and see if there is a new world paradigm shift that can happen there. So again, sir, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, Jai Hind to your audience.
Thank you, sir. Jai Hind.
Okay.